The storm hit Black Hollow Ranch 3 days before Christmas, not the gentle kind of snowfall that makes children press their faces against frosted windows. This was the type of Wyoming blizzard that killed livestock, snapped fence posts like kindling, and turned the distance between the bunkhouse and barn into a death trap if you weren't careful. Wind howled across the plains with a sound like screaming, and the temperature dropped so fast that coffee froze in tin cups before a man could finish drinking. Inside the main ranch house, Clay Merriweather stood at the window with his arms crossed, watching the white chaos swallow his land. He was 53 years old, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from a lifetime of brutal winters and even more brutal business dealings. His ranch sprawled across 12,000 acres of Wyoming frontier, and he ruled it the same way he'd built it, through toughness, intimidation, and the absolute certainty that weakness had no place in his world. "Nobody's coming," his foreman Dutch Carver said from behind him. "Not in this." "Someone better." Clay didn't turn around. "We got 30 men to feed, and that useless drunk we had cooking finally disappeared 2 weeks ago. If we don't get somebody in that cookhouse soon, we're going to have a real problem." Dutch shifted his weight. He was a wiry man in his 40s with a sharp face and sharper instincts for survival. "Boss, I sent word to every town within 50 miles. Ain't nobody willing to come out here in winter, especially not after what happened to the last 2 cooks. What happened to them was their own damn fault." Clay finally turned, his pale eyes cold. "One couldn't handle the hours, the other one stole from me. You think I should apologize for that?" "No, sir. I'm just saying—" "I don't care what you're saying. Find me a cook or those men are going to start eating each other, and I'm not in the mood for that kind of chaos." Dutch nodded and left quickly. Clay returned his attention to the window. The truth was, Black Hollow Ranch had a reputation. Men who worked there either got tougher or got buried. There was no in-between. The winters were merciless, the work was backbreaking, and Clay himself wasn't known for patience or kindness. Good cooks didn't last because good cooks had other options. What he needed was someone desperate. And 2 hours later, desperation arrived. Ivy Mercer sat in the back of a supply wagon that rattled and lurched through the storm like a dying animal. Her hands were wrapped in threadbare gloves that did nothing against the cold, and her oversized patched coat, 3 sizes too big and held together with mismatched buttons, flapped uselessly in the wind. Snow clung to her dark curls and melted against flushed cheeks that burned from the brutal temperature. She was a large woman, not just heavy, but solid, broad-shouldered, thick-waisted, with arms and legs built from years of hard labor. Her gray eyes were sharp beneath exhaustion, and her jaw was set in a way that suggested she'd stopped apologizing for taking up space a long time ago. The driver, an older man named Pike, who smelled like tobacco and wet leather, glanced back at her. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure. Black Hollow ain't friendly, especially not to—" "I know." Ivy cut him off before he could finish. She'd heard every variation of that sentence her entire life. "Especially not to women like you. Women who were too big, too poor, too damaged." "Just get me there." Pike shrugged and snapped the reins. The truth was, Ivy didn't have a choice. She'd been run out of her last job in a nothing town called Haskell Creek after the owner's wife decided Ivy's presence made the customers uncomfortable. Before that, she'd worked in a boarding house kitchen until the landlord tried putting his hands on her, and when she'd fought back, she was the one thrown into the street. Desperation had teeth, and it had been chewing on Ivy Mercer for a very long time. When the wagon finally lurched to a stop outside Black Hollow Ranch, Ivy grabbed her single worn leather bag and climbed down into snow that immediately soaked through her boots. The cold bit into her ankles, her knees, her spine. But she didn't flinch. Ahead of her, the ranch materialized through the storm like something out of a ghost story. Low buildings huddled together against the wind, bunkhouses, barns, storage sheds, and one slightly larger structure that had to be the cookhouse. Everything looked beaten down by weather and neglect. And standing in front of the main building was a line of men watching her. Ivy recognized the look instantly. It was the same look she'd gotten her entire life. Shock, disbelief, disgust. Some of them were already smiling, not friendly smiles, but the kind men wore when they'd just been handed an easy target. One of them, a younger cowboy with a crooked nose and too much confidence, elbowed the man next to him. "That's the cook?" "Jesus Christ," another muttered. "She's going to eat more than she makes." Laughter rippled through the group. Ivy tightened her grip on her bag and started walking. Her boots crunched through snow and frozen mud as she crossed the yard, and with every step she felt their eyes on her. Measuring, judging, dismissing. Dutch Carver stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You Ivy Mercer?" "I am." He looked her up and down slowly, and Ivy forced herself not to react. She'd learned years ago that flinching only made it worse. "You got experience?" Dutch asked. 10 years. Cooked for boarding houses, hotels, work camps. I can stretch food further than most, and I don't waste anything." "That's so." Dutch's tone was flat. "And why exactly should I believe you can handle 30 hungry men in the middle of a Wyoming winter?" Ivy met his eyes without blinking. "Because I'm still here." It wasn't defiance. It wasn't pride. It was just fact. She was still alive when plenty of people in her position weren't. That had to count for something. Dutch stared at her for a long moment. Then he jerked his head toward the cookhouse. "Show me what you got." The inside of the cookhouse was worse than Ivy expected. The place reeked of spoiled meat, sour grease, and something else she couldn't quite identify, but suspected was rot. The wood stove was cold and caked with old ash. Shelves that should have been stocked with supplies were mostly bare. A few sacks of flour, some dented cans, dried beans scattered across a filthy counter. Water barrels near the back wall were frozen solid. Dirty pans were stacked in a corner like someone had just given up halfway through washing them weeks ago. The floor was sticky. The walls were stained. The whole place felt like it had been abandoned by someone who'd finally decided death was preferable to one more meal. Dutch stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. "Last cook ran off 2 weeks ago. Nobody's cleaned since." Ivy set her bag down slowly. She walked through the space, her boots sticking slightly to the floor with every step. She opened cupboards, checked the stove, ran her hand along the counters, and felt the layers of grime. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of male voices outside. Waiting, watching. 30 men? She asked, without turning around. "Give or take." "What time's breakfast?" 5:30? Before dawn." Ivy turned to face him. "I'll need firewood, clean water, and someone to haul supplies from storage." Dutch raised an eyebrow. "That mean you're taking the job?" "That means I'm asking what I need to do it." For the first time, something like respect flickered across Dutch's face. It didn't last long, but it was there. "I'll send someone with wood and water. Supplies are in the shed out back. Anything else?" "Yeah." Ivy pulled off her gloves. "Stay out of my way." Bugged. She worked through the night. First, she got the stove going, breaking apart frozen kindling with numb fingers until sparks finally caught, and heat began spreading through the room. Then she hauled water barrel by barrel from the pump outside, her arms screaming in protest, until she had enough to start washing every single pan, plate, and utensil in the place. The cleaning took hours, scrubbing grease off cast iron, sweeping rotted food into piles, wiping down every surface until her hands were raw and her back ached so badly she could barely straighten. But Ivy didn't stop, because this was what she knew. This was the only thing she'd ever been able to control, turning chaos into order, turning nothing into something people needed. By 3 in the morning, the cookhouse finally looked functional, and by 4:30, she'd started breakfast. She worked with the supplies she had: flour, lard, dried beef, beans, onions, coffee. Nothing fancy, but her hands knew the rhythm. Kneading dough for biscuits, rendering fat for gravy, dicing onions until her eyes burned, building flavors from scraps. When the first cowboy pushed through the door at 5:30, the entire cookhouse smelled like food, real food. The man stopped in the doorway, blinking in confusion. Behind him, others crowded in, and the murmur of conversation died as they saw what Ivy had done. The stove radiated heat. Fresh biscuits were piled on a platter. A massive pot of beef and onion stew sat steaming on the counter. Coffee, strong, dark, and hot, waited in a dented pot. Nobody spoke. Ivy stood behind the counter with flour on her apron and exhaustion in every line of her body. "It's ready," she said simply. For a moment, no one moved. Then the stampede started. Cowboys shoved forward, grabbing plates and bowls, their rough hands trembling slightly as they ladled stew and grabbed biscuits. The first man to taste the food froze mid-chew, his eyes widening. Then he took another bite, and another. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of men who'd been eating garbage for weeks, suddenly remembering what real cooking tasted like. Ivy didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just refilled the biscuit platter and poured more coffee. But inside, something fierce and stubborn straightened its spine. I'm still here, she thought, and I'm not going anywhere. Checked. By the end of the first week, the men had stopped laughing. Not because they respected Ivy, not yet, but because her food had become the only thing that made life at Black Hollow Ranch bearable. She cooked 3 meals a day without complaint. Breakfast before dawn. Lunch during the brief break when men stumbled in from fence repair or cattle checks. Dinner after dark when exhaustion made everyone mean. And every single meal was good. Not just edible. Good. She stretched supplies like a magician. Turned tough cuts of meat into tender stew. Made dried beans taste rich and filling. Baked bread that men tore apart with their bare hands because they couldn't wait for it to cool. But respect still didn't come. The cowboys whispered about her when they thought she couldn't hear, joked about her size, made cruel comments about how much food she must eat when nobody was looking, treated her like a piece of furniture that happened to produce meals. Useful, but not quite human. Ivy had lived through worse, so she said nothing. The only person who never joined the mockery was a tall ranch hand named Rhett Calloway. He was in his late 20s, lean and quiet, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed permanently shadowed by something unspoken. He worked harder than most of the other men, spoke less, and had a way of disappearing into corners where nobody noticed him. But Ivy noticed, because every time the other cowboys made a joke at her expense, Rhett's jaw tightened just slightly, and every time she turned around, his gaze was somewhere else, like he'd been watching her but didn't want to be caught. It unsettled her, not because she thought he was dangerous, but because there was something familiar about him that she couldn't quite place. Something in the set of his shoulders, the way he carried shame like a second skin. She'd seen that look before, a long time ago. Vocês tetasiam. Guys. 3 weeks into her tenure at Black Hollow Ranch, a reckless cowboy named Boone came back from town carrying more than supplies. He had a story. Dinner that night was venison stew and cornbread. The men crowded into the cookhouse like they always did, shoveling food into their mouths and talking too loud. Ivy moved between the stove and counter, refilling bowls, wiping down surfaces, trying to become invisible the way she'd learned to do. Then Boone's voice cut through the noise. Hey boys, you know where our cook here used to work? The room went quiet. Ivy's hand stilled on the ladle. Boone grinned, his teeth flashing in the lamplight. He was a younger man, maybe 23, with the kind of easy cruelty that came from never being held accountable for anything. The Velvet Mare. That's where she worked before she came here. Someone laughed nervously. What's the Velvet Mare? Saloon, down in Rawlins. Real notorious place, if you know what I mean. Boone leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the attention. The kind of place where the entertainment ain't just drinking. Ivy's chest tightened. She'd known this moment would come eventually. It always did. The past never stayed buried, not for women like her. That true? One of the older cowboys asked, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Ivy. You work at a whorehouse? I worked in the kitchen, Ivy said quietly. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I cooked. Same as I do here. Sure you did. Boone's grin widened. That's what they all say. Laughter spread through the room like poison. Ivy set the ladle down carefully. She didn't look at any of them. I'm done for the night, she said. Clean your own damn dishes. Then she walked out. Behind her, the laughter grew louder. She made it halfway to the small shack behind the cookhouse, the cramped, freezing room Clay had given her to sleep in, before her legs stopped working. Ivy sank onto a stack of firewood near the back wall of the barn, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Snow fell around her in the darkness, and the cold bit into her skin, but she didn't care. She'd survived this before. She'd survive it again. But knowing that didn't make it hurt less. The Velvet Mare had been the lowest point of her life. She'd been 20 years old, desperate, and homeless. The owner had hired her to cook for the staff, promised her steady work and a place to sleep. And for 6 months, that's exactly what it was. Until the night a group of wealthy ranchers came through town. Ivy had been cleaning the kitchen late when one of them stumbled in, drunk and looking for something to amuse himself with. He'd taken one look at her size and started laughing. Called his friends over. They'd surrounded her, mocking her body, asking how much she charged, debating whether any man would pay for a woman who looked like her. She'd tried to leave. They blocked the door. And standing just outside the kitchen, frozen in the hallway, had been a young ranch hand, barely more than a boy, who'd watched the whole thing happen and done absolutely nothing. Ivy squeezed her eyes shut against the memory. She hadn't thought about that night in years, hadn't let herself. "You shouldn't be out here." Ivy's head snapped up. Rhett Calloway stood a few feet away, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his face barely visible in the darkness. "I'm fine," Ivy said automatically. "No, you're not," she bristled. "What do you care?" Rhett didn't answer right away. He just stood there, snow collecting on his shoulders, his expression unreadable. "They're wrong," he finally said. "About you." Ivy let out a bitter laugh. "You don't even know me. I know you work harder than any of them. I know you've kept this ranch running for 3 weeks without a single day off. And I know what Boone said in there was meant to hurt you because he's a coward who needs to make someone else small so he can feel big." Ivy stared at him. There was something raw in Rhett's voice, something that sounded like guilt. "Why do you care?" she asked again, quieter this time. Rhett's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might actually answer. Then he stepped back. "Just don't let them win," he said. "They're not worth it." Before Ivy could respond, he turned and disappeared into the storm. Tag. The next morning, Ivy found fresh eggs, coffee beans, and split firewood stacked neatly outside her door. No note, no explanation. But she knew who'd left them, and for the first time since arriving at Black Hollow Ranch, something inside her softened just enough to let a sliver of hope creep in. Boone made another joke 3 days later. This time, Rhett didn't say a word. He just walked across the bunkhouse, grabbed Boone by the front of his shirt, and smashed his fist directly into the man's jaw. The fight was over in seconds. Boone hit the floor hard, blood streaming from his nose, his eyes wide with shock. The other cowboys scrambled backward, stunned into silence. Rhett stood over him, breathing hard, his knuckles split and bleeding. "Say one more goddamn word about her," Rhett said quietly, "and I'll break every bone in your face." Nobody moved. Rhett turned and walked out. That night, Ivy knocked on the door of the small storage room where Rhett slept. He answered after a long pause, his shirt untucked, his face bruised on one side. "You shouldn't have done that," Ivy said. "Probably not. They're going to make your life hell now." "They already do." Rhett leaned against the doorframe. "I don't care." Ivy studied him, this quiet, broken man who'd stepped between her and cruelty without asking for anything in return. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Rhett looked at her for a long moment. The lamplight flickered across his face, casting shadows that made him look older than he was. "Because," he said finally, "I should have done it a long time ago." Ivy's breath caught, and in that moment she knew. She finally recognized him. The boy from the hallway. The silent witness. The coward who'd watched her humiliation and done nothing. Rhett saw the recognition in her eyes and flinched. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I've been sorry every day since." Ivy didn't know what to say, so she turned and walked away, her heart pounding, her mind reeling, the past and present colliding in a way that made her chest ache. Because the man who'd just risked everything to defend her was the same boy who'd once abandoned her to wolves. And she had no idea which version of him to believe. Ivy didn't sleep that night. She lay on the narrow cot in her freezing shack, staring at the ceiling while wind rattled the walls and memories she'd buried years ago clawed their way back to the surface. The boy in the hallway, his face pale with fear, his eyes wide and helpless as those men circled her like wolves, their laughter sharp enough to draw blood. She'd hated him for his silence, hated him almost as much as she'd hated the men who'd humiliated her, because at least their cruelty was honest. His cowardice had been something worse. A choice to look away when looking might have cost him something. And now here he was, Rhett Calloway, older, quieter, carrying that same shame like a weight around his neck. Part of her wanted to scream at him, demand to know why he thought fighting Boone now made up for standing frozen back then. But another part of her, the part that had survived by recognizing desperation in others, understood something she didn't want to admit. Rhett wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was just trying to become someone different than the boy he'd been. Whether that mattered or not, Ivy couldn't decide. By the time dawn broke, she'd given up on sleep entirely. She dressed in the dark, wrapped herself in her patched coat, and trudged through fresh snow to the cookhouse. Her body ached from exhaustion, but her hands knew what to do even when her mind was too tangled to think straight. She built the fire, kneaded dough, sliced salt pork, brewed coffee strong enough to strip paint. The routine steadied her. It always had. When the first cowboys stumbled in at 5:30, Ivy had breakfast waiting, biscuits and gravy, fried potatoes, bacon that crackled in the pan. The men ate in silence, their eyes sliding toward her and then away, like they weren't quite sure what to do with her anymore. Boone didn't show up. Word had spread about the fight, and nobody seemed eager to test whether Rhett's threat had been serious. But the whispers hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd gotten worse, because now the men weren't just mocking Ivy's past. They were speculating about what exactly was happening between her and the quiet ranch hand who'd bloodied his knuckles defending her honor. Ivy heard the rumors in fragments, caught them in sidelong glances and half-finished sentences that died the moment she walked into a room. Some of the cowboys thought Rhett was sleeping with her. Others figured he felt sorry for her. A few seemed genuinely confused about why anyone would bother standing up for a woman like Ivy at all. She tried not to care, tried to focus on the work, the only thing she'd ever been able to control. But the truth was, the rumors hurt worse than the outright cruelty had. Because now people were looking at her and seeing something pathetic. A lonely woman so desperate for kindness that she'd mistake pity for affection. A joke wrapped in a tragedy wrapped in another joke. And maybe they were right. Maybe that's exactly what she was. The morning after the fight, Ivy was hauling water from the pump when she slipped on a patch of black ice hidden beneath fresh snow. The bucket flew from her hands, water spraying across the frozen ground, and pain shot through her ankle as she hit the earth hard. For a moment she just lay there, breath knocked out of her lungs, staring up at the gray sky. Then hands, strong and careful, slid beneath her shoulders and knees, lifting her like she weighed nothing at all. Ivy's eyes flew open. Rhett didn't say a word. He just carried her across the yard toward the cookhouse, his jaw set, his breathing steady despite the cold. "Put me down," Ivy said. Her voice came out weaker than she intended. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're hurt." "I said put me down." Rhett stopped walking. He looked down at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Act like you don't deserve help." Ivy's throat tightened. "Because I don't." "That's bullshit." The bluntness of it startled her into silence. Rhett started walking again, carrying her the rest of the way to the cookhouse. He set her down gently on a chair near the stove, then knelt in front of her and carefully unlaced her boot. His hands were rough from work, but surprisingly gentle as he examined her ankle. "It's swollen," he said quietly, "but I don't think it's broken." "I'll be fine by tomorrow." Ivy pulled her foot back, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I've had worse." "I know." Something in his tone made her look at him. Rhett was still kneeling, his hands resting on his thighs, his expression caught somewhere between guilt and something else she couldn't name. "You remember me," he said. It wasn't a question. Ivy's breath caught. "Yeah, I was 17, didn't know anything except how to keep my head down and stay out of trouble." Rhett's voice was low, steady, like he'd rehearsed this 1,000 times in his head. "I worked for those men, rich bastards who owned half the territory. I was nobody, just some ranch hand's kid trying to survive." "So you stood there and watched?" "Yeah." Rhett's jaw tightened. "I stood there and watched because I was scared. Scared they'd turn on me. Scared I'd lose my job. Scared of everything except doing the right thing." Ivy wanted to hate him. Wanted to tell him his fear didn't excuse anything, but the words stuck in her throat because she understood fear better than most people. Knew what it did to you, how it hollowed you out until survival was the only thing that mattered. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you deserve to know." Rhett stood up slowly. "And because I need you to understand that I'm not that kid anymore. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. But I need you to know I see you, really see you, and I'm not walking away this time." Before Ivy could respond, Rhett turned and left. She sat there alone in the warmth of the cookhouse, her ankle throbbing, her heart pounding, and something dangerous stirring in her chest. Hope. And hope, Ivy knew from experience, was the most terrifying thing of all. Over the next 2 weeks, a strange pattern emerged. Rhett started appearing wherever Ivy needed him without being asked. He repaired the icy steps outside the cookhouse before she could slip again, carried water barrels that were too heavy for her, sharpened kitchen knives and left them on the counter before dawn, hauled firewood and stacked it neatly where she could reach it. He never asked for thanks, never lingered, just did the work and disappeared. But Ivy noticed everything. She noticed the way his hands shook slightly when he handed her things, like he wasn't sure she'd accept them. Noticed how he positioned himself between her and the other cowboys during meals, a silent barrier against cruelty. Noticed the exhaustion in his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping any better than she was. And despite every instinct screaming at her to keep her distance, Ivy found herself watching for him, listening for his footsteps, feeling something loosen in her chest when he walked through the door. It terrified her. Because the last time she'd let herself feel anything close to this, she'd been 19 years old and working at a lumber camp kitchen. A young logger had paid attention to her, smiled at her, complimented her cooking, made her believe someone might actually want her. Then his friends found out, made jokes, asked him how desperate he had to be to settle for someone like Ivy, and he'd laughed along with them, laughed like she'd been nothing but a joke the whole time. Ivy had learned her lesson. Men who showed kindness to women like her always had an angle, always wanted something, or worse, felt sorry for her in a way that was supposed to pass for affection. She wasn't going to fall for that again. But Rhett made it difficult. One evening, after the dinner rush had died down and most of the cowboys had stumbled back to the bunkhouse, Ivy was scrubbing pots when she heard footsteps behind her. "You need help?" She didn't turn around. "I'm fine." "You always say that." "Because it's always true." Rhett moved closer, leaning against the counter where she could see him in her peripheral vision. He'd rolled up his sleeves and his forearms were covered in small scars from years of hard work. "Can I ask you something?" Ivy's hand stilled in the soapy water. "Depends on what it is." "Why'd you come here? To Black Hollow?" "Because I needed work." "There's work everywhere. Why here?" Ivy finally looked at him. His expression was open, curious, without any of the judgment she'd learned to expect. "Because here was the only place desperate enough to take me." Rhett frowned. "That's not true." "Yes, it is." Ivy dried her hands on a rag, her voice flat. "You think any decent ranch or hotel wants someone like me? I'm too big, too loud, too much. And now that everyone knows about the velvet mare, I'm too dirty for respectable work." She met his eyes. "Black Hollow hired me because Clay Merriweather was out of options. Not because I was the best choice, because I was the only choice." "You're wrong." "I'm not." "Yes, you are." Rhett straightened, his voice gaining an edge she hadn't heard before. "You're the best cook this ranch has ever had. The men know it. Dutch knows it. Even Clay knows it, though he'll never admit it out loud. You didn't get this job because we were desperate. You're keeping it because you're good at it." Ivy wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly her chest ached, but belief was a luxury she'd stopped being able to afford. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. Rhett opened his mouth, closed it. For a moment he looked like he was wrestling with something too big to put into words. "Because," he finally said, "you're the first person I've met in 10 years who's tougher than I am." Ivy blinked. "I've worked ranches from Montana to Texas," Rhett continued, "survived blizzards, stampedes, bar fights, and more near-death experiences than I can count. And I thought that made me strong. But watching you show up here with nothing, take every insult these men throw at you, and still get up before dawn to feed them?" He shook his head. "That's strength I'll never have." Something cracked inside Ivy's chest. She turned back to the dishes, blinking hard against the sudden burn in her eyes. "You should go." "Ivy, I said go." Rhett hesitated. Then he nodded slowly and left. Ivy finished the dishes in silence, her hands shaking, her throat tight. And when she finally let herself cry, it was the kind of crying that came from somewhere deep and old. The place where she'd buried every hurt, every humiliation, every moment she'd convinced herself she didn't deserve kindness. Because Rhett Calloway had just looked at her and seen something worth defending, and she had no idea what to do with that. The next morning, Clay Merriweather showed up in the cookhouse. It was the first time Ivy had seen the ranch owner up close since her arrival. He was a hard man with cold eyes and a presence that made the air feel heavier. He stood in the doorway watching her work for a long moment before speaking. "You're still here." Ivy glanced up from the stove. "Yes, sir. Didn't think you'd last a month." "I'm tougher than I look." Clay's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Dutch says the men are eating better than they have in 5 years. I do my job." "You do more than that." Clay stepped further into the room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "I heard about what happened with Boone, about your past." Ivy's stomach clenched. Here it comes, she thought, the moment he tells me to leave. But Clay surprised her. "I don't care where you worked before," he said bluntly. "I care whether you can do the work I'm paying you for. And so far you can. So whatever those idiots out there are saying about you, ignore it. You've earned your place here." Ivy stared at him, too shocked to respond. Clay turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Rhett Calloway." Ivy's heart stuttered. "What about him?" "He's a good worker. Keeps to himself. Doesn't cause trouble." Clay's pale eyes locked onto hers. "I don't care what's happening between you two, as long as it doesn't interfere with the work. Understood?" Ivy's cheeks burned. "There's nothing happening. I don't care," Clay repeated. "Just keep cooking." Then he was gone. Ivy stood there in the empty cookhouse, her mind reeling. She'd expected judgment, expected to be run off the ranch the moment her past came to light. Instead, Clay Merriweather, a man notorious for his cruelty, had just told her she'd earned her place. It didn't erase the years of rejection, didn't heal the scars, but it was something. That afternoon, Ivy was kneading dough when Rhett appeared in the doorway carrying an armful of split wood. "Thought you might need this," he said. Ivy wiped flour from her hands. "You don't have to keep doing this." "I know." "Then why do you?" Rhett set the wood down near the stove, then straightened. For a moment, he just looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made her feel exposed and seen all at once. "Because I want to," he said simply. "Why? Do I need a reason?" "Yes." Ivy crossed her arms. "People always have reasons. They want something, or they feel guilty, or they're trying to prove something. So what is it? What do you want from me?" Rhett's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded flickering across his face. "Nothing. I don't believe you." "I'm not asking you to." Rhett took a step closer. "But the truth is, I don't want anything from you, Ivy. I just want to know you. And maybe, if you'll let me, I want you to know me too. The real me. Not the scared kid I used to be." Ivy's breath caught. Nobody had ever said anything like that to her. Nobody had ever looked at her the way Rhett was looking at her now, like she was someone worth knowing, worth understanding, worth standing beside. It scared her more than anything else ever had. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Do what?" "Trust someone." Rhett's expression softened. "Then don't, not yet. Just let me be here. That's all I'm asking." Ivy wanted to say no, wanted to protect herself the way she always had, by keeping everyone at arm's length, by refusing to believe anyone could see her as more than a punchline or a burden. But she was tired. So tired of being alone, so tired of pretending she didn't want exactly what Rhett was offering. "Okay," she said quietly. Rhett's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Okay." They stood there in the warm cookhouse, flour dusting the air between them, and for the first time in longer than Ivy could remember, she felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. Over the next few days, something shifted between them. Rhett started staying after he brought supplies, lingering near the counter while Ivy worked. At first, they didn't talk much, just existed in the same space. Him repairing things that didn't quite need repairing, her pretending not to notice the way his presence made the cookhouse feel less lonely. But gradually, conversation began to happen. Small things at first. Rhett asking about her recipes, Ivy asking about his work on the ranch. Neither of them pushing too hard or digging too deep. Then one evening, while Ivy was rolling out pie crust, Rhett spoke into the comfortable silence. "I grew up about 50 miles from here," he said. "On a cattle ranch smaller than this one. My father worked himself to death trying to make it successful. Literally, dropped dead of a heart attack when I was 16. Ivy's hands stilled. "I'm sorry." Rhett shrugged, but the gesture looked heavy. After he died, my mother sold the place for almost nothing and moved back east to live with family. I stayed. Figured I'd make something of myself out here. His mouth twisted into something bitter. Turns out I was just running from one kind of failure to another. You're not a failure. I was. Rhett met her eyes. That night at the Velvet Mare, I was working for those ranchers because I was desperate for money, for respect, for anything that would make me feel like I mattered. And when they started treating you like garbage, I told myself it wasn't my problem. That getting involved would cost me everything I'd worked for. You were 17. That's not an excuse. Maybe not. Ivy returned to rolling the dough, her voice quiet. But we all do things we're ashamed of when we're trying to survive. Rhett watched her for a long moment. What about you? What about me? You said you've been cooking for 10 years. What were you doing before that? Ivy's jaw tightened. Surviving. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Rhett didn't push. He just waited, patient in a way most people never were with her. Finally, Ivy sighed. My parents died when I was 14. Fever swept through our town and took half the people living there. I didn't have family, so I ended up in a workhouse. Spent 4 years sewing shirts for pennies until I was old enough to leave. After that, she shrugged. I went wherever the work was. Did whatever I had to do to eat. The Velvet Mare was one stop among many, Ivy's voice hardened. And before you ask, no, I never sold myself. I cooked, that's all. But it doesn't matter what the truth is because people believe what they want to believe. I believe you. Ivy looked up sharply. Rhett's expression was steady, sincere. I believe you, he repeated. And anyone who says otherwise can answer to me. Something inside Ivy's chest cracked open just a little bit more. You can't fight everyone who insults me, she said softly. Watch me. Despite everything, Ivy almost smiled. You're stubborn. So are you. Yeah. Ivy returned her attention to the pie crust. I guess I am. They fell back into comfortable silence, and for the first time since arriving at Black Hollow Ranch, Ivy allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to have someone on her side. Someone who saw her as more than a burden or a joke. Someone who stayed. But hope was dangerous, and Ivy had been burned too many times to trust it completely. So she kept her guard up. Kept waiting for the moment Rhett would realize she wasn't worth the trouble. Kept bracing for the inevitable betrayal. Because in her experience, that's how these things always ended. The betrayal Ivy had been waiting for came, but not from the direction she expected. It was late February when everything changed. The worst of winter had loosened its grip just enough that supply wagons could make it through from town again. Dutch returned one afternoon with mail, packages, and news that spread through the bunkhouse faster than wildfire. Clay Merriweather had family coming to visit. Ivy was scrubbing potatoes when Dutch appeared in the cookhouse doorway, his weathered face more serious than usual. Need to talk to you about something, he said. Ivy wiped her hands on her apron. What is it? Boss is expecting guests next week, his sister and her husband, fancy folks from back east. Dutch shifted his weight. They'll be staying in the main house, but they'll want meals brought over. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. All of it needs to be, refined. Refined. Yeah, proper dining, multiple courses, the kind of food rich people expect. Ivy's stomach tightened. I can do that. Good. Dutch hesitated. There's something else. The sister, Mrs. Catherine Hartwell, she's particular about who serves her. She's not going to want... He trailed off. But Ivy understood perfectly. She's not going to want someone like me anywhere near her table, Ivy finished flatly. Dutch had the decency to look uncomfortable. I'm just telling you what Clay said. You'll cook the food, but one of the ranch hands will bring it over. You stay in the cookhouse. Fine. Ivy, I said fine. Ivy turned back to the potatoes, her jaw clenched so tight, her teeth ached. Anything else? Dutch left without another word. Ivy stood there in the warm cookhouse, her hands shaking as she gripped the knife. She'd known this moment would come eventually, had prepared herself for it 100 times. But preparation didn't make it hurt less, because the message was clear. She was good enough to cook for them, but not good enough to be seen by them. That evening, Rhett found her sitting on the back steps of the cookhouse after everyone else had eaten. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if Ivy had been in any state to notice. "Dutch told me," Rhett said quietly, sitting down beside her. Ivy didn't look at him. "Then you know there's nothing to talk about." "That's not true." "What do you want me to say, Rhett? That I'm surprised? That I expected anything different?" Ivy's voice was brittle. "Rich people don't want to look at someone like me. They never have. At least Clay's being honest about it. It's still wrong. Wrong doesn't matter." Ivy finally turned to face him. "This is how the world works. People like me exist to serve people like them, but only if we stay invisible while we do it." Rhett's expression darkened. People like them? Rich people, powerful people, people who... Ivy stopped abruptly, something clicking in her mind. "You're defending them pretty hard for a ranch hand." "I'm not defending anyone. I'm saying you deserve better." "Do I?" Ivy studied his face in the fading light. "Because you talk about rich people like you know them, like you understand how they think. Most cowboys I've met wouldn't give a damn about what some Eastern socialite thinks of the help." Rhett's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the horizon, and something in his posture shifted. "You're right." "About what?" "I do know them." Rhett's voice was low. "Because I'm one of them." The words hung in the cold air between them. Ivy's breath caught. "What are you talking about?" "My name isn't just Rhett Calloway." He still wouldn't look at her. "It's Rhett Calloway Merriweather. Clay is my father." The world tilted sideways. Ivy stood up so fast she nearly slipped on the icy step. "You're lying." "I'm not." "Clay Merriweather is your father? The man who owns this entire ranch?" Ivy's voice rose. "And you've been pretending to be some nobody ranch hand this whole time?" "I wasn't pretending." Rhett stood too, his hands raised like he was approaching a spooked animal. "After the war, I came back and I didn't want to be his son anymore. Didn't want the name or the privilege or any of it. So I told him I'd work the ranch like everyone else. No special treatment." He agreed. "Why?" "Because I needed to prove I could survive on my own. That I was worth something without his money or his name." Ivy laughed, but it came out harsh and broken. "You wanted to prove yourself? That's what this was about? Some rich boy's identity crisis? It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Rhett? Because from where I'm standing, you've been playing cowboy while the rest of us have been trying to survive for real." Ivy's voice shook. "You could walk away from this place tomorrow and you'd still have everything. A family, a home, a future. I don't have any of that. This job is all I've got. And you've been pretending we're the same?" "I never pretended that. You let me believe you understood what it's like to be desperate. To have nothing." Ivy's eyes burned. "But you don't understand anything. You're just a rich man playing dress-up." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Ivy took a step back. "You want to talk about fair? Your father's sister is coming here next week, and he's making sure I stay hidden because people like her don't want to see people like me. And you, his son, have been living alongside us like you're one of us, when the whole time you've had the power to change things and you've done nothing." Rhett flinched. "I couldn't." "You could have. You just didn't." Ivy's voice dropped. "The night you told me you remembered me from the Velvet Mare, you said you were nobody back then. Just some scared kid who didn't have the power to help me. But you weren't nobody, were you? You were Clay Merriweather's son. You had all the power in the world. You just chose not to use it." "I was ashamed," Rhett said quietly, "of him, of what his money represented, of the kind of men he associated with, the same men who humiliated you that night. And what about now? Are you still ashamed?" "Every single day." Ivy stared at him, her chest heaving, emotions warring inside her that she couldn't untangle. Anger, hurt, betrayal, and underneath it all, something worse, the realization that she'd been stupid enough to trust him. "I can't do this," she whispered. "Ivy." "Stay away from me." She turned and walked back into the cookhouse, leaving Rhett standing alone in the gathering dark. That night, Ivy cried until she had nothing left. Then she got up, washed her face, and started preparing for the next day's meals, because falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford. The week before Clay's sister arrived was the longest of Ivy's life. Rhett tried to talk to her 3 times. Each time, Ivy refused to engage. She couldn't look at him without feeling the weight of everything he'd kept hidden. Couldn't reconcile the quiet ranch hand who'd defended her with the rich man's son who'd been pretending to be someone he wasn't. The other cowboys noticed the tension. Boone, his nose still crooked from where Rhett had broken it, seemed particularly delighted by whatever had happened between them. He made snide comments during meals that Ivy ignored with practiced ease. But ignoring Rhett was harder, because despite everything, part of her still wanted to believe his apology had been real, that his kindness hadn't been some elaborate performance, that he'd seen her as an equal even when he'd been lying about who he was. But that was the problem, wasn't it? He'd never seen her as an equal. How could he, when he'd been standing on a mountain of privilege the whole time? The morning Catherine Hartwell arrived, Ivy woke before dawn to begin cooking. Dutch had given her a list of requirements that read like something from a hotel menu. Roasted duck, fresh vegetables, 3 different kinds of bread, custard tarts, wine-braised beef. Ivy cooked for 12 hours straight. She prepared everything perfectly, plating each dish with care, making sure every element was exactly as requested. Then she watched through the cookhouse window as one of the younger ranch hands carried the covered platters across the yard to the main house. Mrs. Hartwell never saw her, never knew her name, never realized the woman responsible for her exquisite dinner was the same woman her brother had ordered to stay hidden. And Ivy told herself it didn't matter, told herself she was used to being invisible. But that night, alone in her freezing shack, the lie felt heavier than usual. 3 days into the visit, Rhett cornered her in the cookhouse after dinner service. "We need to talk," he said. "No, we don't." Ivy kept scrubbing the same pot she'd been working on for 5 minutes. "Yes, we do." Rhett moved closer. "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry. I'm done." Ivy finally looked at him. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything." "That's the same thing." "It's not." Rhett ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to look at me the way you're looking at me now. Like I'm one of them." "You are one of them." "I'm trying not to be. By pretending." Ivy set the pot down hard. "That's not how it works, Rhett. You don't get to shed your privilege by putting on work clothes and acting humble. It doesn't disappear just because you're uncomfortable with it." "I know that." "Then what do you want from me? Forgiveness? Understanding?" "I want you to see that I'm trying." Rhett's voice was raw. "I'm trying to be better than the man my father raised me to be. Better than the scared kid who watched you get hurt and did nothing. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've been a coward. But I'm here now, and I'm not walking away." "Why not? You've done it before." The words landed like a punch. Rhett's expression crumbled. "That's not fair." "Nothing about this is fair." Ivy's voice broke. "You gotta choose to work here. You gotta choose to hide who you were. You gotta choose whether to help me or not. I don't get choices, Rhett. I never have. I go wherever there's work, and I stay until someone decides I'm not worth keeping around anymore. That's my life. And you? You've been treating this whole thing like some kind of moral experiment, when for me it's just survival." "I know." "No, you don't." Ivy's eyes burned. "Because if you did, you would understand why I can't trust you. Rich people don't help people like me out of kindness. They do it because it makes them feel better about themselves. And I won't be your redemption story. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Rhett stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "It's me realizing that you're the first person I've ever met who doesn't want anything from me except honesty. And I'm terrified I've already ruined that." Ivy's breath caught. For a moment they just stood there, close enough to touch, separated by everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Then the door swung open and Dutch appeared. "Ivy, we got a problem." Ivy stepped back from Rhett quickly. "What kind of problem?" "Mrs. Hartwell wants to meet the cook." Ice flooded Ivy's veins. "What?" "She loved tonight's dinner, wants to thank you personally." Dutch looked uncomfortable. Clay told her no, but she's insisting. "Then Clay can insist harder." "Ivy." I said no. Ivy's voice was sharp. "I'm not going over there so some rich woman can pat herself on the back for being gracious to the help." "It's not like that." "Yes, it is." Ivy crossed her arms. "Tell her I'm sick, tell her I'm busy, tell her whatever you want. But I'm not going. Dutch glanced at Rhett, then back to Ivy. Clay's not going to like this. I don't care what Clay likes. After Dutch left, Rhett spoke quietly. You should go. Ivy whirled on him. Excuse me? My Aunt Catherine is a difficult woman, but she's not cruel. If she wants to thank you, maybe you should let her. Why? So I can curtsy and smile while she tells me how quaint it is that someone like me can cook? So you can show her exactly who you are. Rhett's expression was serious. She's expecting some timid servant who will be grateful for her attention. Give her the truth instead. And what's the truth? That you're the best cook in Wyoming and you don't need her approval to know it. Despite everything, something fierce stirred in Ivy's chest. She hated that Rhett was right. Hated that his words made her want to prove something. But mostly she hated that even after everything, he still knew exactly what to say to reach her. 20 minutes later, Ivy walked across the yard to the main house for the first time since arriving at Black Hollow Ranch. Dutch met her at the door, his expression nervous. Just be polite. I'm always polite. Ivy, relax, Dutch. I'm not going to burn the place down. Inside, the main house was warm and well lit, furnished with heavy wooden furniture and thick rugs that probably cost more than Ivy had earned in her entire life. She followed Dutch through a hallway to a sitting room where Catherine Hartwell waited. Clay's sister was exactly what Ivy had expected. Elegant, carefully dressed, with sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that came from never having to prove herself to anyone. She was in her mid-40s, attractive in the way wealthy women manage to be, and she studied Ivy with undisguised curiosity. So you're the cook, Catherine said. Yes, ma'am. That was an excellent meal tonight. Truly impressive. Thank you. Catherine tilted her head slightly. You're not what I expected. Most people say that. A flicker of amusement crossed Catherine's face. I imagine they do. Tell me, where did you train? I didn't. No formal education? No, ma'am. Just 10 years of practice. Remarkable. Catherine gestured to a chair. Please sit. Ivy remained standing. I'd rather not, if it's all the same to you. And why is that? Because I've been on my feet for 14 hours, and if I sit down now, I might not get back up. Ivy kept her voice even. Was there something specific you wanted, Mrs. Hartwell? Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. Direct. I appreciate that. Very well. I wanted to tell you personally that your cooking is exceptional. I've dined at some of the finest establishments in New York and Boston, and tonight's meal rivaled many of them. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness. It's observation. Catherine leaned back in her chair. My brother tells me you've only been here 2 months. That's right. And in that time, you've transformed the quality of meals at this ranch considerably. I do my job. You do more than that. Catherine paused. I also understand there was some unpleasantness. Regarding your previous employment, Ivy's jaw tightened. If you're asking whether the rumors are true, they're not. I cooked at the Velvet Mare, that's all. I wasn't asking. Catherine's voice was cool. I was going to say that I don't care where you worked previously. What matters is the work you're doing now. And based on what I've seen, you're wasted here. Ivy blinked. Excuse me? I'm opening a restaurant in Denver this spring, high-end dining for the city's elite. I've been searching for a head cook, someone with skill and creativity. Catherine's eyes locked on Ivy's. I'd like you to consider the position. The room tilted. Ivy stared at Catherine Hartwell, certain she'd misheard. You want me to work for you? I want you to run my kitchen, full authority over menu, staff, suppliers. The salary would be triple what my brother is paying you here. Catherine pulled a card from her pocket and held it out. Think about it. If you're interested, contact me at this address within the next 2 weeks. Ivy took the card with numb fingers. That's all, Catherine said, turning her attention to a book on the side table. Thank you for the meal, and for your time. Ivy walked back to the cookhouse in a daze. A real job, in a real restaurant. Working for someone who'd seen her cooking and wanted her specifically, not because she was desperate, but because she was good. It was everything she'd ever wanted, and it meant leaving Black Hollow Ranch, leaving the only place that had ever felt close to stable, leaving Rhett. Not that Rhett mattered anymore, she told herself, but the lie felt thin even in her own mind. The next morning, Rhett was waiting outside the cookhouse before dawn. "I heard," he said. Ivy kept walking. "Heard what?" "About Catherine's offer." News travels fast. "Ivy, wait." Rhett caught up to her. "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know." "You should." That stopped her. Ivy turned slowly. "What?" "You should take it." Rhett's expression was unreadable in the pre-dawn darkness. "It's a good opportunity. Better than anything you'll get here." "Since when do you want me to leave?" "I don't." Rhett's voice was rough. "But I'm not going to be the reason you turn down something that could change your life." "You're not the reason for anything I do, aren't I?" Ivy wanted to deny it, wanted to tell him he meant nothing to her, but the words stuck in her throat because they both knew the truth. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked quietly. "Because Rhett stopped, started again. "Because you deserve better than this place. Better than my father's ranch where you have to hide who you are. Better than me." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make yourself the villain so it's easier for me to leave." Ivy's voice shook. "You want me gone? Fine. But don't pretend it's for my benefit." "I'm not pretending." Rhett stepped closer. "Trying to do the right thing for once in my life, even if it kills me." "The right thing," Ivy repeated bitterly. "You know what the right thing was, Rhett? Being honest with me from the start. But you weren't, and now you get to stand here playing the noble martyr while I'm the one who has to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. Stop." Ivy held up a hand. "Just stop. I can't do this right now. I have breakfast to make." She walked past him into the cookhouse and closed the door. But through the window, she watched him stand there in the snow for a long time before finally walking away. And despite everything, despite the lies and the hurt and the impossible situation, part of her wanted to run after him. But she didn't. Because Ivy Mercer had spent her entire life learning that wanting something didn't mean you got to keep it. The days after Catherine's offer felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for someone to push her one way or the other. Ivy kept cooking, kept cleaning, kept moving through the routines that had sustained her for as long as she could remember. But everything felt different now. The cookhouse that had become familiar suddenly felt temporary. The meals she prepared felt like counting down to something inevitable. She carried Catherine's card in her apron pocket, the paper growing soft from being touched too many times. Denver. A real restaurant. A salary that would mean she'd never have to worry about where her next meal was coming from. Never have to watch her belongings get thrown into the street. Never have to beg for work from people who looked at her like she was taking up too much space just by existing. It was everything she'd told herself to stop dreaming about years ago. But leaving meant walking away from the first place in a long time where she'd felt something other than afraid. And it meant walking away from Rhett. Not that he was a reason to stay, she told herself repeatedly. Not after the lies. Not after discovering he'd been pretending this whole time to be someone he wasn't. Not after realizing the connection she'd felt between them had been built on a foundation of things he'd conveniently left unsaid. But telling herself something and believing it were two different things. The morning of the 5th day after Catherine's offer, Ivy was making bread when Clay Merriweather appeared in the cookhouse doorway. She'd seen him a handful of times since his sister's visit, but he'd never sought her out directly. "My sister left this morning," Clay said without preamble. Ivy kept kneading. "I know. She tells me she offered you a job." "She did. You planning on taking it?" Ivy's hand stilled in the dough. She turned to face him. "Does it matter?" Clay's pale eyes studied her. "I don't beg people to stay. If you want to go, go. But I'll tell you this, you're the best cook this ranch has had in 20 years, and if you leave, you'll be hard to replace." It wasn't quite a compliment, but coming from Clay Merriweather, it was close enough. "Thank you," Ivy said carefully. "Don't thank me. Just think about whether running off to Denver is what you actually want or if you're just running away from something here." He left before she could respond. Ivy stood there staring at the empty doorway, her heart pounding, because Clay had just put into words the exact question she'd been avoiding for days. Was she running towards something better or just running away from Rhett? That afternoon, Dutch found her chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. "You're going to break that knife if you keep going like that," he observed. "I'm fine." You've said that about 40 times in the last week. Dutch leaned against the counter. Want to talk about it? No? All right. He didn't move. For what it's worth, the men would be sorry to see you go. Ivy snorted. Sure they would. I'm serious. Most of them have come around. Even Boone's been keeping his mouth shut lately. Dutch paused. You've earned respect here. That's not nothing. Respect doesn't pay bills. True, but it's something you can't buy either. Dutch pushed off the counter. Just think about it. After he left, Ivy set down the knife and pressed her palms flat against the counter. Her hands were shaking. She'd spent so long being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like she was lucky just to have a job. And now people were acting like her leaving would matter, like she'd become part of something instead of just passing through. It terrified her how much she wanted to believe them. 2 nights later, disaster struck in the form of a broken stove damper. Ivy noticed it during dinner preparation, smoke backing up into the cookhouse instead of drawing properly up the chimney. She tried adjusting the vent, but something was stuck. Probably frozen from the temperature swing, she thought. She'd deal with it after dinner service. But by the time the last cowboy had left and Ivy was alone cleaning up, the smoke had gotten worse. Her eyes burned. Her throat felt raw. She propped the door open despite the cold and kept working, telling herself she'd fix it first thing in the morning. She didn't notice when a spark from the overheated stove landed in a pile of firewood stacked too close to the wall. Didn't notice when the dry wood started smoldering. By the time she smelled something wrong, flames had already begun spreading up the wall behind the woodpile. Ivy grabbed a bucket of water and threw it at the fire, but it wasn't enough. The flames licked higher, feeding on old wood and grease that had soaked into the walls over decades. Smoke filled the cookhouse in seconds, thick and black and suffocating. She tried for another bucket but couldn't see through the smoke. Couldn't breathe. Her lungs burned. Her eyes streamed. She stumbled toward where she thought the door was, but the smoke disoriented her. Her legs buckled. The last thing Ivy remembered was hitting the floor and thinking, with strange clarity, that this was a stupid way to die. She woke up outside in the snow. Someone was carrying her, strong arms wrapped around her body, a coat covering her face, muffled shouting all around. She tried to breathe and coughed violently instead, her lungs rejecting the smoke that had filled them. "Stay still," a rough voice said near her ear. "You're okay. Just breathe." Rhett. Ivy forced her eyes open. Through tears and smoke blur, she saw his face above her, streaked with soot, his expression tight with fear. Behind him, the cookhouse was fully engulfed in flames. Cowboys ran with buckets of water that did nothing against the inferno. The night sky glowed orange. "The cookhouse," Ivy tried to say, but it came out as a rasping cough. "Forget the cookhouse." Rhett set her down carefully in the snow far from the fire, then knelt beside her. His hands moved over her shoulders, her arms, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" I can't." "Take slow breaths, in and out. That's it." Ivy focused on breathing. Each inhale felt like swallowing glass, but gradually the panic subsided enough for her to think. She looked past Rhett at the burning building. Flames consumed everything she'd worked to create over the past 2 months. All her routines, her sanctuary. The one place she'd managed to carve out a small piece of stability. Gone. "How did you—" she started. "I saw the smoke from the barn." Rhett's voice was shaking. "By the time I got there, you were already unconscious. The whole place was—" He didn't finish, didn't need to. Ivy stared at him. This man who'd lied to her, who'd broken her trust, who she'd spent the last week avoiding, and realized he'd just run into a burning building to save her life. "You could have died," she whispered. "So could you." Rhett's eyes locked on hers, and there was something raw and desperate in them. "Do you have any idea what it was like seeing that building on fire and knowing you were inside?" "Rhett, I thought I'd lost you." His voice cracked. "I thought I'd lost you, and the last thing I said to you was that you should leave, and I can't." Ivy reached up and pressed her sooty hand against his cheek. "I'm here." Rhett closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. "I know, but for a minute there you weren't. And I realized that nothing else matters. Not my name, not my father, not the lies I told or the mistakes I made. The only thing that matters is that you're alive." Around them, cowboys continued fighting the fire, but their efforts were useless. The cookhouse collapsed in on itself with a shower of sparks and a sound like thunder. Everything Ivy had built was ash, but sitting in the snow with Rhett's arms around her and smoke still burning in her lungs, all she could think was that she was alive. He'd made sure of it. They gave her one of the small storage sheds to sleep in that night. Someone dragged in a cot and a few blankets. It was freezing and smelled like old leather, but it was shelter. Clay told her to rest, that they'd figure out the food situation in the morning. Ivy lay there staring at the ceiling, her body aching, her mind racing. She could have died tonight, should have died probably, if Rhett hadn't been watching. And now the cookhouse was gone, which meant her job was gone, which meant there was nothing keeping her at Black Hollow Ranch anymore. Catherine's offer sat in her pocket like an answer to a question she hadn't wanted to ask. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "It's me!" Rhett's voice came through the door. Ivy sat up slowly, her chest protesting. "Come in." Rhett entered carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. His face was clean now, the soot washed away, but he looked exhausted. He sat down on the floor near the cot and unwrapped the bundle. Bread, cheese, dried meat, and a canteen of water. "Figured you hadn't eaten," he said quietly. Ivy took the canteen and drank. The water soothed her raw throat. "Thank you. How are you feeling?" "Like I breathed fire." "That's about what it looked like." Rhett handed her the bread. "Dutch is already planning to rebuild the cookhouse. Says he can have it done in 2 weeks if the weather holds." "That's fast." "Everyone wants you back." Rhett's eyes met hers. "Including me." Ivy broke off a piece of bread but didn't eat it. "Rhett, I can't." I know you're probably going to take Catherine's offer, and you should. You absolutely should. But I need to say something first, and I need you to let me say it all before you decide anything." Ivy nodded slowly. Rhett took a breath. "I was 17 when I first saw you at the Velvet Mare. Just some kid who thought working for rich men would make me important. And when they started treating you like garbage, I stood there and did nothing because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my job. Afraid of being laughed at. Afraid of everything except the one thing I should have been afraid of. Becoming the kind of man who watches cruelty happen and calls it none of his business." "Chipas." He paused, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. "After that night, I couldn't forget you. Couldn't forget the way you held yourself together even when those men were trying to break you down. And I couldn't stop thinking about what a coward I'd been. So I joined the army, figured maybe if I did something brave, it would make up for all the times I'd been afraid. But it doesn't work like that. You can't erase cowardice with courage. You just have to live with what you've done and try to be better." Ivy's throat tightened. "When the war ended, I came back here and I couldn't stand being my father's son anymore. Couldn't stand what his name represented, so I hid it. Worked alongside men who had nothing because I wanted to prove I could survive without privilege. And then you showed up." Rhett's voice dropped. "And I saw you again. This woman I'd never forgotten, who'd been living in my head as a reminder of every failure I'd ever had. And you didn't remember me. Didn't recognize the coward from the hallway. And I thought maybe that meant I'd changed enough that I could finally make things right. By lying to me? By being honest about everything except the one thing I was most ashamed of." Rhett met her eyes. "I didn't tell you about my father because I didn't want you to see me the way I saw myself back then, as someone who had all the power in the world and used none of it to help you." Ivy set down the bread. "What do you want me to say?" "Nothing. I just want you to know that loving you has made me braver than I've ever been. And if you leave, I'll understand. But I won't regret a single moment of trying to be worthy of you." The word hung in the air between them, loving. Ivy's breath caught. "You can't love me." "Why not?" "Because people don't." The words came out broken. "People tolerate me, people use me, people laugh at me, but they don't love me. Then people are idiots." Rhett moved closer. "Because you're the strongest, fiercest, most extraordinary person I've ever met, and I've loved you since the moment you told my father's foreman to stay out of your way." Ivy's eyes burned. "You can't just say things like that." "Why not? It's true." "Because it makes me want to believe you, and I can't afford to believe you." "Why not?" Rhett asked again, softer this time. "Because I'm terrified." Ivy's voice cracked. "I'm terrified that if I stay, if I let myself care about you, it'll turn out like everything else in my life. You'll realize I'm too much trouble or too heavy or too damaged and you'll leave, and I don't think I can survive that. Rhett reached out slowly and took her hand. His palm was warm against her cold fingers. I'm not going anywhere. You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow too. And the day after that. And every day until you believe me. He squeezed her hand gently. I know I've given you every reason not to trust me, but I'm asking you to try anyway. Not because I deserve it, because we both deserve a chance to be happy. Ivy stared at their joined hands, at the rough calluses on his palms that matched her own, at the way his fingers wrapped around hers like they belonged there. She wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. I don't know how, she whispered. How to what? How to let someone love me. Rhett smiled, sad and genuine. Then I'll teach you, if you'll let me. For a long moment, Ivy sat there in the cold storage shed with smoke still clinging to her clothes and Rhett's hand warm in hers. Outside, the remains of the cookhouse still smoldered. Her whole world had burned down tonight, and somehow, sitting here, she felt more hopeful than she had in years. I'm still angry at you, she said finally. I know. And I don't forgive you, not yet. I don't expect you to. But maybe, Ivy took a shaky breath. Maybe I don't want to leave either. Rhett's expression transformed. Yeah? Yeah. Ivy managed a small smile. Someone has to make sure these cowboys don't starve while they rebuild my cookhouse. Your cookhouse? Damn right, my cookhouse. I earned it. Rhett laughed, and the sound was so full of relief and joy that it made Ivy's chest ache. You absolutely did. They sat in silence for a while, hands still clasped, both of them too exhausted to move. Finally, Rhett stood up. I should let you rest. Rhett? He turned back. Thank you, Ivy said quietly, for pulling me out of there. Always. He paused in the doorway. I mean it, Ivy. Whatever happens next, I'm not walking away. Not this time. After he left, Ivy lay back down and pulled the blankets around herself. Her body hurt. Her lungs burned. Everything she'd worked for was ash. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. And that was worth more than she'd ever imagined. The next morning, Ivy woke to voices outside the shed. She dressed slowly, her body protesting every movement, and stepped out into bright sunshine. What she found stopped her in her tracks. The entire ranch had turned out. Cowboys, stable hands, even Clay himself stood in the yard near the burned cookhouse ruins. And they were working. Some cleared debris. Others measured and marked where new walls would go. Dutch directed the operation while several men unloaded lumber from wagons. What's happening? Ivy asked. Dutch looked up from the plans he'd been studying. Rebuilding. I can see that, but why is everyone... Because you're part of this place now, Dutch said simply. And we take care of our own. Ivy's throat tightened. One of the younger cowboys, a kid named Tom, who'd been one of the first to make jokes about her size, approached nervously. Miss Mercer? I just wanted to say I'm sorry. About before. About the things I said. You didn't deserve that. It's fine, Ivy managed. It's not fine, but I'm going to do better. Tom gestured at the construction site. We all are. Over the next week, Ivy watched the cookhouse rise from the ashes. The men worked faster than she'd thought possible, driven by something she couldn't quite name. Guilt, maybe? Or genuine respect? Or maybe just the realization that good cooking was worth fighting for. She helped where she could, though her lungs still weren't right, planned the new layout, ordered supplies, made temporary meals in a makeshift outdoor kitchen that the cowboys set up for her. And every day, Rhett was there, working alongside everyone else, meeting her eyes across the construction site, existing in her orbit without demanding anything. Slowly, Ivy's anger began to soften into something more complicated. On the 8th day, Clay pulled her aside. My sister sent a telegram, he said. Wants to know if you've made a decision about Denver. Ivy had been avoiding thinking about Catherine's offer, but she couldn't put it off forever. What do you think I should do? Clay raised an eyebrow. You asking my opinion? Apparently. Then I think you should do whatever the hell makes you happy. Clay paused. But I'll tell you this, happiness isn't always about having the most or the best. Sometimes it's about having something that's yours. He walked away before Ivy could respond. That night, she found Rhett in the barn, checking on a horse that had gone lame. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. Hey, hey, Ivy moved closer. Can we talk? Always. She took a breath. I need to know something. If I stay, not for you, but because I want to. What happens? Between us? Rhett set down the brush he'd been using. What do you want to happen? I don't know. That's the problem. Ivy crossed her arms. I've never done this before. Never let someone get close. Never trusted anyone enough to risk it. Then we figure it out together. Rhett stepped closer. No pressure, no expectations. Just us. Whatever that looks like. And if I mess it up, then we mess it up together. Rhett's expression was earnest. Ivy, I'm not asking for perfect. I'm just asking for real. Ivy studied his face in the lamplight, saw the honesty there, the hope, the fear that mirrored her own. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. But I'm tired of running. Then don't. Rhett reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face gently. Stay. Build something here. Let me prove that I meant everything I said. Ivy closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. Okay. Okay? Okay. She opened her eyes. I'm staying. I'm terrified and I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm staying. Rhett's smile was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Then he kissed her, gentle and careful, like she was something precious. And Ivy kissed him back, letting herself feel something she'd never allowed before. Hope. Trust. The beginning of something that might actually last. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rhett pressed his forehead against hers. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For giving me a chance to be better. Ivy's throat tightened. You already are. They stood there in the quiet barn, holding each other while horses shifted in their stalls and the Wyoming wind howled outside. And for the first time in her life, Ivy Mercer felt like she'd found something worth fighting for. Not a job, not security, not even safety, but a place where she belonged, and a person who saw her, really saw her, and chose to stay anyway. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was hers, and that was enough. The morning Ivy sent her telegram to Catherine Hartwell declining the Denver offer, she didn't feel regret. She felt something closer to relief mixed with terror, the kind that came from choosing the unknown over the guaranteed. She stood in the telegraph office in town, watching the operator tap out her message, and tried not to think about what she was giving up. A real salary, a real restaurant. The kind of opportunity that might never come again for someone like her. But then she thought about the barn last night, about Rhett's hands on her face and the way he'd looked at her like she was something worth keeping, about the cookhouse rising from ash because an entire ranch had decided she mattered enough to rebuild for. Those things couldn't be measured in dollars or opportunities. They were something else entirely, something she'd never had before. Message sent, the operator said. Ivy nodded and walked back out into the cold March morning where Rhett was waiting with the wagon. Done? He asked. Done. He didn't ask what she'd decided, didn't need to. The answer was written in the fact that she'd climbed into the wagon beside him instead of boarding the eastbound stage. They rode back to Black Hollow Ranch in comfortable silence, and Ivy let herself feel the weight of what she'd chosen. Not the safe choice, not the smart choice, but the choice that felt right in a way nothing else in her life ever had. The new cookhouse was finished 3 days later. It was bigger than the old one, with better ventilation, more counter space, and a stove that actually worked properly. The men had even built her a small private room off the back, barely more than a closet, but it had a real door and a window and a narrow bed that was hers. Ivy stood in the doorway that first morning, taking it all in, and felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Belonging. What do you think? Dutch appeared beside her, looking pleased with himself. It's perfect. Good. Because the men are already complaining about eating cold beans for breakfast. He paused. Glad you stayed. Me too. Dutch nodded and left, and Ivy got to work. She unpacked her few belongings, arranged the kitchen exactly how she wanted it, and started making the first real meal the ranch had seen in 2 weeks. By noon, the cookhouse smelled like home. The cowboys flooded in for lunch like starving wolves, and Ivy served them beef stew thick enough to stand a spoon in, cornbread that steamed when they broke it open, and apple pie made from the last of the winter stores. They ate in silence first, then the compliments started coming. Rough, awkward, but genuine. "Missed this," one of them mumbled through a full mouth. "Missed you," another added, then looked embarrassed he'd said it out loud. Ivy just nodded and kept serving. But inside, something settled. These men weren't her friends exactly. Some of them had been cruel to her. Others had just been indifferent. But they'd rebuilt her kitchen. They'd shown up. And in their own clumsy way, they were telling her she belonged here. That afternoon, Clay summoned both Ivy and Rhett to the main house. They stood in his office, a room that smelled like tobacco and old leather, while he studied them with those cold, pale eyes that missed nothing. "I'm not a man who deals in speeches," Clay said finally. "So I'll keep this simple. Rhett, you're still my son whether you want to be or not. And Ivy, you've earned your place here. What happens between the two of you is your business as long as it doesn't interfere with the work." "It won't," Rhett said. "See that it doesn't." Clay's gaze shifted to Ivy. "Catherine was disappointed you turned her down. She doesn't get disappointed often." "I appreciate the offer," Ivy said carefully, "but I'd rather stay here." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Because this is where I want to be." Clay studied her for a long moment. "You could have had more. Better pay, better conditions, a real future." "I have a real future here." "Do you?" Clay leaned back in his chair. "Or are you just settling because it's easier than taking a risk?" Ivy's spine straightened. "With respect, sir, I've spent my entire life taking risks. Coming here was a risk. Staying after everyone found out about my past was a risk. Every single day I wake up and choose to exist in a world that doesn't want me is a risk. So don't tell me I'm settling. I'm choosing. There's a difference." Something that might have been approval flickered across Clay's face. "Fair enough." He turned to Rhett. "You planning on making an honest woman out of her?" Rhett's ears went red. "That's between us." "Then get out of my office and get back to work. Both of you." Outside, Ivy and Rhett stood in the cold air, both slightly shell-shocked. "That went better than expected," Rhett said. "Did it?" "He didn't threaten to fire either of us. For my father, that's practically a blessing." Ivy laughed despite herself. "Your family is strange." "You're not wrong," Rhett hesitated. "What he said about making an honest woman out of you, I didn't ask him to." "Rhett." "Yeah?" "Breathe." Ivy touched his arm. "I'm not expecting anything. We're figuring this out, remember? No pressure." "Right. No pressure." But Rhett looked like he wanted to say something else. Ivy waited. "It's just," Rhett started, then stopped, started again. "I know we're taking this slow, and I know you need time to trust me. But I want you to know that when I think about the future, you're in it, always." Ivy's throat tightened. "Rhett, I'm not proposing, not now, but I needed you to know where my head is, where my heart is." He met her eyes. "You're it for me, Ivy. You're the thing I didn't know I was looking for until I found you." Nobody had ever said anything like that to her. Nobody had ever looked at her the way Rhett was looking at her now, like she was the answer to every question he'd never known how to ask. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything." Rhett smiled. "Just don't run away screaming, that's all I'm asking." "I think I can manage that." They stood there in the cold afternoon, and Ivy let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe this was real. That maybe she'd finally found something that wouldn't disappear the moment she turned her back. Spring came slowly to Wyoming that year, but it came. Snow melted into mud that sucked at boots and turned the ranch yard into a mess. Rivers swelled with runoff that sounded like distant thunder. The days grew longer, light stretching into evening, and the ranch came alive with the kind of work that defined the season: calving, branding, fence repair, getting ready for the drive to summer pasture. Ivy settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable for the first time in her life. She cooked 3 meals a day, managed the kitchen supplies, and even started teaching one of the younger cowboys how to bake bread when he expressed interest. His name was Tom, the same kid who'd made jokes about her size when she first arrived. Now he stood in her kitchen with flour on his hands, listening intently as she explained how to knead dough properly. You gotta feel it, Ivy said, demonstrating. Too little, and it won't rise right. Too much, and it gets tough. You're looking for that sweet spot where it's smooth but still has some give. Tom tried, his movements clumsy but earnest. Like this? Close. Keep going. You'll get it. Why are you helping me? Tom asked suddenly. After the things I said when you got here. Ivy kept kneading her own dough. Because you apologized, and because holding grudges takes more energy than I've got to spare. I was a real ass. Yeah, you were. Tom winced. I'm sorry. Really. My ma raised me better than that. Then honor her by being better now. Ivy glanced at him. Everyone deserves a second chance, Tom. Don't waste yours. The men treated her with something that resembled actual respect now. Not all of them, not always, but enough that it felt like progress. They asked her opinion on things, saved her the best cuts of meat when they butchered, stopped making jokes about her weight, at least where she could hear them. And Rhett was there. Not constantly, not suffocatingly, but present in a way that steadied her. He still brought her firewood without being asked, still fixed things before they broke, still looked at her like she was something precious, even when she was covered in flour and sweat and exhaustion. They were taking it slow, learning each other, building something that felt real instead of rushed, but old fears didn't disappear just because new hope showed up. One evening, in late April, Ivy was preparing dinner when she overheard two cowboys talking outside the cookhouse window. They didn't know she was there, didn't realize their voices carried through the open window into her kitchen. You think it'll last? One of them asked. What, Rhett and the cook? Yeah. Hell if I know. She's not exactly his type, is she? What's his type? I don't know. Someone smaller, maybe. Prettier. You know what I mean. Ivy's hand stilled on the knife she'd been using to chop onions. That's a shitty thing to say, the first cowboy said. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. He's Clay Merriweather's son. He could have anyone. Why her? Maybe because she's worth having. Ever think of that? Come on, be realistic. They moved away before Ivy could hear more, but the damage was done. She stood there in her kitchen, the knife trembling in her hand, and felt every old insecurity come roaring back. Because that cowboy had just voiced the exact fear that kept Ivy awake at night. The question she couldn't stop asking herself even when everything seemed good. Why her? What did Rhett see in her that she couldn't see in herself? And how long before he realized he'd made a mistake? Ivy finished making dinner on autopilot, her mind spinning. She served the men without meeting anyone's eyes, cleaned up in silence, and retreated to her small room as soon as she could. That night, she was sitting on her narrow bed staring at nothing when Rhett knocked on her door. Ivy, you okay? Fine. Can I come in? She didn't answer, which he apparently took as permission. He opened the door slowly and found her sitting there in the dim lamplight, still in her work clothes, looking like she'd forgotten how to move. What happened? Rhett asked, his voice gentle. Nothing. That's not true. He sat down beside her carefully, leaving space between them. Talk to me. Ivy was quiet for a long time. Then, without looking at him, she said, Why me? What? Why me? Ivy's voice was steadier than she felt. You could have anyone. Any woman in Wyoming would probably say yes if you asked. So why are you here with me? Rhett's expression shifted into something pained. Did someone say something to you? It doesn't matter what anyone said. I'm asking you. He was quiet for a long moment, then moved closer. You really want to know? Yes, because you're real. Rhett's voice was low but fierce. Every other woman I've ever met has wanted something from me. My father's money, my name, the security that comes with both. But you? You didn't even know who I was, and you still told me to leave you alone. You still made it clear that you didn't need me or anyone else to survive. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. Rhett shifted to face her fully. I love you because you're strong enough to stand on your own. Because you survived things that would have broken most people. Because you look at the world that's been cruel to you and you still choose kindness. Because when I'm with you, I'm not Clay Merriweather's son or the ranch owner's heir. I'm just Rhett, and that's the only thing I've ever wanted to be. Ivy's eyes burned. I'm scared. Of what? That you'll wake up one day and realize you made a mistake. That I'm too much work or too complicated or just too much. Ivy. Rhett reached for her hands. Look at me. She did. You are not too much. You have never been too much. And anyone who made you believe that was wrong. His grip tightened. I'm not perfect. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to say the wrong thing or do something stupid or forget something important, but I will never ever wake up and regret choosing you. That's not how this works. How do you know? Because I've spent 10 years trying to outrun the memory of watching you suffer and doing nothing to stop it. And now that I have a chance to be the person you deserve, I'm not letting go. Not for anything. Ivy pulled her hands free, and for a second Rhett looked terrified that she was walking away. But instead she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He held her tight, one hand in her hair, the other pressed against her back. I love you too, Ivy whispered into his shirt. I'm scared, and I don't trust Easy, and I'm probably going to mess this up. But I love you. Rhett's breath hitched. Say it again. I love you. Again. I love you, you stubborn ass. He laughed, and the sound was so full of joy that it made Ivy's chest ache. That's the one I'll remember. They stood there as the small room, holding each other while the evening light faded outside. And Ivy let herself believe it, let herself feel it. The terrifying, exhilarating truth that someone loved her, really loved her. Not despite who she was, but because of it. It didn't erase the scars, didn't heal all the wounds. But it was a start. And sometimes Ivy was learning a start was enough. Summer arrived with heat that baked the earth and turned the grass golden. The ranch hands drove most of the cattle to higher pasture, leaving only a skeleton crew behind. The work got easier, the days longer, and Ivy found herself with time she'd never had before. Time to breathe, time to think, time to imagine what came next. She started experimenting with recipes, trying things she'd never had the luxury to attempt before. Complicated sauces, delicate pastries, dishes she'd only read about in the tattered cookbook she kept hidden in her room. The cowboys became her test subjects, sometimes enthusiastically, sometimes less so. What the hell is this? Boone asked one evening, poking suspiciously at a piece of fish in cream sauce. Trout almondine, Ivy said. Eat it or starve. Your choice. He ate it. Grudgingly admitted it was good. Even asked for seconds, which Ivy considered a victory. She was finding her voice again, not just as a cook, but as a person. Speaking up when something bothered her, setting boundaries, refusing to shrink herself to make others comfortable, and Rhett watched it all with something like pride in his eyes. One afternoon in late June, she was experimenting with a new pie recipe when Dutch appeared in the doorway looking uncomfortable. Got a visitor, he said. Ivy looked up, confused. Who? See for yourself. Catherine Hartwell stood in the yard, elegant as ever, despite the dust and heat. She smiled when she saw Ivy emerge from the cookhouse, wiping flour from her hands. Mrs. Hartwell, Ivy said, genuinely surprised. I didn't expect to see you again. I was in the area visiting my brother. Thought I'd stop by and see how you were doing. Catherine's eyes swept over the new cookhouse, taking in the improvements. I heard about the fire. I'm glad you're all right. Thank you. And I'm glad you stayed. Catherine's expression was unreadable. Though I'll admit I was disappointed when you declined my offer. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Catherine waved a hand dismissively. You made the choice that was right for you. I respect that. But I'm curious. What changed your mind about Denver? Ivy hesitated, then decided on honesty. I realized I'd rather build something that's mine than work for someone else's vision, no matter how good the opportunity. Catherine's eyebrows rose. That's an ambitious answer. Maybe. What are you building here? I don't know yet. Ivy smiled. But I'm figuring it out. Catherine studied her for a long moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Then she pulled a card from her bag, different from the first one, cream-colored with gold lettering. If you ever decide you want to open your own place, contact me at this address. I have connections, investors, people who might be interested in backing a talented cook with vision. Ivy took the card, stunned. Why would you do that? Because talent like yours is rare, and because I believe in investing in women who know what they want. Catherine's smile was genuine. Think about it. No pressure. But the offer stands. I have a feeling you're going to do something remarkable, Ivy. I'd like to be part of it when you do. After she left, Ivy stood in the cookhouse holding the card and trying to process what had just happened. Catherine Hartwell, one of the wealthiest women in the territory, had just offered to help her open her own restaurant. Her own restaurant. The idea was intoxicating, terrifying, impossible. Or maybe it wasn't. That evening, she showed the card to Rhett. They were sitting outside the cookhouse watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, both of them tired from the day's work. "What do you think?" she asked. Rhett turned the card over in his hands, studying it. "I think Catherine doesn't make offers like this lightly." "But is it crazy? Me? Running a restaurant? Is it crazy?" Rhett looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Ivy, you're the best cook I've ever met. You could run circles around half the restaurants in Denver." "That's not the same as actually doing it." "No, it's not." Rhett handed back the card. "But you'd figure it out. You always do." Ivy stared at the card, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. "I'd need a location, money, staff, experience I don't have running a business." "So you'd learn." "What if I fail?" "What if you succeed?" Rhett countered. "What if you build something amazing? Something that's entirely yours? Isn't that worth the risk?" The possibility hummed through Ivy like electricity. Her own place, her own kitchen, her own rules. No more cooking for cowboys who sometimes appreciated her and sometimes didn't. No more being at the mercy of someone else's decisions. "Would you help me?" she asked quietly. "With what?" "All of it. Building something, making it work, being there when I'm terrified I've made a huge mistake." Rhett's expression softened. "Ivy, I'd help you build an empire if that's what you wanted. But this has to be your choice, your dream. I'm just here to support it." "What about the ranch? Your father?" "I've been talking to him about that." Rhett leaned back against the cookhouse wall. "I'm still his heir whether I want to be or not. But that doesn't mean I have to live my life according to his plans. I can help you build something and still be part of this place. It doesn't have to be one or the other." Ivy turned the card over in her hands, feeling the weight of possibility. "I need time to think about it." "Take all the time you need." But the seed had been planted. And over the next few weeks, it grew into something Ivy couldn't ignore. She started making plans. Nothing concrete at first, just ideas scribbled in the margins of her cookbook. What kind of food she'd serve, what the space would look like, how she'd run things differently than any kitchen she'd ever worked in. She'd hire women who needed chances, train them properly, pay them fairly, create the kind of place she'd wish had existed when she was desperate and alone. She talked to Dutch about supply chains and costs, asked the cowboys what they'd want in a restaurant if money wasn't an issue, even had a tentative conversation with Clay about the business side of things. He'd been surprisingly helpful, offering advice without trying to take over. "You're serious about this," Clay observed one afternoon when she'd come to ask about negotiating with suppliers. "Maybe." "Good. You've got the skill. Just need the spine to match it." "I have spine." "I know, but opening a business isn't the same as cooking for cowboys. People will try to take advantage of you, especially men who think a woman has no business running anything." "Let them try." Clay almost smiled. "That's the attitude you'll need. Don't let anyone tell you what you're capable of, not even yourself." By late August, Ivy had made her decision. She was going to do it, going to take Catherine's offer and build something that was entirely hers. She just had to figure out where. The answer came from an unexpected source. One evening in early September, Rhett took her into town for dinner at the only decent restaurant within 50 miles. A place called the Frontier House that had been serving travelers and locals for 20 years. The food was mediocre at best, but it was one of the few places couples could go for something resembling a proper date. They were halfway through their meal, Ivy picking at overcooked chicken, Rhett making faces at watery soup, when the owner, an older man named Walter, stopped by their table. "Heard you're thinking about opening a place of your own," he said to Ivy without preamble. Ivy blinked. "News travels fast." "Small town." Walter smiled, but it looked tired. "I'm retiring next spring, selling this building. Thought you might be interested." Ivy's heart stopped. "The Frontier House is for sale?" "Will be." "Place needs work. Lot of work, actually. But the bones are good. Location solid. Right on the main road. Gets traffic from the stage line and the freight wagons. Could be something special with the right person running it. I don't have that kind of money, Ivy said automatically. Talk to Catherine Hartwell. I hear she's looking to invest in the right opportunity. Walter glanced between them. Think about it. I'd rather sell to someone who will actually care about the place than the highest bidder who will run it into the ground. After he left, Ivy and Rhett stared at each other across the mediocre meal. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Rhett asked. That this place has terrible soup? That you should buy it? Ivy's pulse raced. It's too big, too fast. Or it's exactly the right size at exactly the right time. Rhett leaned forward. This is it, Ivy. This is the opportunity. Everything you've been planning for, right here. But what if I'm not ready? You've been ready your whole life. You just didn't have the chance before. He reached across the table and took her hand. You can do this. I know you can. Ivy looked around the restaurant with new eyes, saw past the dated decor and mediocre food to the bones underneath. Good space. Solid structure. Close enough to the ranch that she could maintain connections, but far enough away to be her own thing. Large windows that would let in natural light. A kitchen she could design herself. Room for tables and a real dining experience. It was perfect. It was terrifying. It was everything she'd never let herself dream of having. Okay, she heard herself say. Let's do it. Rhett's smile could have lit up the entire territory. The next 6 months were chaos. Ivy contacted Catherine, who connected her with investors willing to back a woman with talent and vision. She negotiated with Walter for a fair price on the building, less than she'd feared, more than she had, exactly what the investors were willing to risk on her. She worked with contractors to renovate the space while continuing to cook at the ranch. Spent her days feeding cowboys and her evenings planning color schemes, menu layouts, and kitchen designs. She barely slept, barely stopped moving. Her body ached constantly from the double workload, but she'd never felt more alive. Rhett was there for all of it, helping with renovations on his days off, running errands when she was too busy, listening to her vent when things went wrong, and they went wrong constantly. Contractors who didn't show up, supplies that arrived damaged, costs that ballooned beyond estimates. He celebrated every small victory with her. The day the new stove was installed, the first coat of paint on the walls, the moment she finalized the menu after weeks of testing and revising. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, covered in paint and sawdust and exhaustion, he proposed. They were painting one of the dining room walls. It was late, well past midnight, because they'd both worked full days before coming here. Ivy had just finished a section and stepped back to assess it, only to realize the color was all wrong. I want to burn this whole place down and start over, she said, only half joking. Rhett laughed from where he was painting trim. No, you don't. Yes, I do. This color is terrible. Why did I pick this color? Because you were tired and second-guessing yourself. He set down his brush. The color's fine, Ivy. You're just exhausted. I'm always exhausted. I know. Rhett crossed the room to her, leaving paint-spattered footprints on the drop cloth. Marry me. Ivy turned, paintbrush in hand, certain she'd misheard. What? Marry me. Rhett stopped in front of her, covered in paint spatters and sawdust. I know this isn't how it's supposed to happen. I don't have a ring. We're both a mess, but I don't want to wait anymore. I want to build this life with you. Officially. Rhett, you don't have to answer now. But I needed to ask. Needed you to know that when I imagine the future, any future, it's always with you. Ivy stared at him, this man who'd saved her life, who'd believed in her when no one else did, who'd helped her build something from nothing and never once asked for credit. Yes, she said. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, you paint-covered idiot. Rhett crossed the remaining distance in one stride and kissed her, and Ivy kissed him back, tasting paint and sweat and exhaustion and the future they were building together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rhett pressed his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. I love you too. Ivy smiled. But we still need to repaint this wall. Tomorrow. Rhett, tomorrow, he repeated firmly. Tonight, we're celebrating. They got married in early March, right before the restaurant was scheduled to open. It was a small ceremony, just close friends from the ranch, Dutch, Clay, and a handful of people from town who'd become part of Ivy's life over the past year. Ivy wore a simple cream dress she'd made herself, working on it late at night between everything else. It wasn't fancy, but it fit her properly and made her feel beautiful in a way she'd never felt before. Rhett wore his best shirt and couldn't stop grinning like a fool. Clay gave her away without being asked, which surprised everyone, including Ivy. He'd shown up that morning and simply said, "Someone needs to walk you down the aisle. Might as well be me." The ceremony was short. The preacher asked the traditional questions. When he got to, "Do you take Rhett to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Ivy answered without hesitation. "I do," because she'd learned something important over the past year. Love wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about choosing someone every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And she chose Rhett, would keep choosing him, not because he'd saved her, though he had, but because they'd saved each other. The restaurant opened 2 weeks later on a sunny April morning. Ivy had renamed it Mercer House Kitchen, and she'd designed every detail herself. Warm lighting that made people feel welcome, comfortable seating that encouraged them to linger, a menu that featured honest, hearty food made with care and creativity. Nothing fancy, nothing pretentious. Just good cooking served with respect for both the food and the people eating it. The opening day was terrifying. Ivy had hired 2 young women to help her, Sally and Margaret, both of them poor and desperate for work, both of them eager to learn. She'd trained them for weeks, teaching them not just recipes, but the why behind every technique. "You're not just following instructions," she'd told them. "You're understanding what makes food good, what makes it memorable. Once you understand that, you can adapt anything." Now they stood in this kitchen with her, nervous and excited, while the first customers began arriving. Orders started flowing, slowly at first, then faster. People who'd come out of curiosity, people who'd heard rumors, people who just needed a meal and figured they'd give the new place a try. Ivy cooked like her life depended on it. Roasted chicken with herbs, beef stew with root vegetables, fresh bread and real butter. Pies made from scratch, apple, cherry, custard. Every plate that went out was perfect. Not because Ivy was perfect, but because she cared. Because she understood that for some of these people, this meal might be the only good thing in their day. Rhett managed the front of house with surprising skill, greeting customers and making everyone feel welcome. He'd turned out to be good with people when he wasn't hiding who he was. Charming without being fake. Attentive without being intrusive. By the end of the first night, Ivy was exhausted. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest. But when she looked around at the dining room, at the happy faces and empty plates, at customers lingering over coffee because they weren't ready to leave, she felt something she'd never expected to feel. Pride. Not in spite of who she was, but because of it. She'd survived poverty, cruelty, humiliation, and a world that told her she'd never be enough. And she'd built something anyway, built a life worth living, found love worth fighting for, created a place where people felt welcome and fed and cared for. That first year wasn't easy. There were mistakes, dishes that didn't work, suppliers who failed to deliver, customers who complained for no good reason. There were nights when Ivy lay awake wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. Nights when the weight of debt and responsibility felt crushing. But there were also victories. Regular customers who became friends. People who traveled from miles away just to eat at Mercer House. Reviews in regional newspapers that praised not just the food, but the atmosphere Ivy had created. And there were the women. Young women who came looking for work and left with skills and confidence they hadn't had before. Women like her, too big, too poor, too damaged by a world that had chewed them up and spit them out. Ivy hired them, trained them, paid them fairly, treated them like they mattered. She taught them to cook, yes, but she also taught them that being soft didn't mean being weak, that kindness in a cruel world was the most dangerous thing of all, that survival was an act of defiance, and thriving was revenge against everyone who'd ever tried to break you. "Why do you do it?" Sally asked one day. She'd been working at Mercer House for 6 months now, and her confidence had transformed completely. "Take chances on girls like us?" "Because someone took a chance on me," Ivy said simply, "and because I remember what it's like to be desperate." "But we're not. You're successful now. You don't have to." "Success doesn't mean forgetting where you came from." Ivy looked at the younger woman. "It means making sure other people don't have to suffer the way you did." The ranch didn't disappear from their lives. Ivy still visited regularly, still cooked for special occasions. The Cowboys treated her like family now, like someone who belonged, not just someone who'd been useful once. Even Clay, in his gruff way, seemed proud of what she'd built. "You've done well," he told her one afternoon when she'd brought food for a ranch celebration. "Better than most people thought you would." "Thanks," Ivy said dryly. "That's almost a compliment." "It is a compliment. Take it." And slowly, over months and then years, Ivy began to understand something important. She'd spent so long believing she had to earn her place in the world, had to prove she deserved kindness, deserved respect, deserved love. But that was never true. She'd always deserved those things. The world had just been too cruel to give them to her. Until she'd met people who saw her differently, who looked past her size, her past, her scars, and saw someone worth believing in. Rhett had been the first, but he hadn't been the last. And now Ivy was becoming that person for others. The young women she trained, the customers who came in feeling invisible and left feeling seen. The people who needed to know that strength didn't look like perfection. It looked like showing up every day despite everything telling you not to. 2 years after Mercer House opened, Ivy found out she was pregnant. The news terrified her. She'd never imagined herself as a mother. Never thought she'd have the chance. Never believed the world would be kind enough to give her that. She was standing in the restaurant kitchen when the realization hit her. She'd been feeling off for weeks, tired in a way that went deeper than usual, nauseous at odd times, her body changing in small ways she'd tried to ignore. But she couldn't ignore it anymore. When she told Rhett that evening, his reaction erased every fear. "We're having a baby?" His voice cracked on the last word. "Yeah. A baby. With you. That's generally how it works." Rhett pulled her close, his arms tight around her, his face buried in her hair. "I love you so much it hurts sometimes. I love you too. This baby is going to be so loved, Ivy, so loved and so safe and so wanted." Ivy's eyes burned. "I know." Because she did know. This child wouldn't grow up the way she had. Unwanted, dismissed, taught to take up as little space as possible. This child would be raised by people who'd fought for every inch of happiness they'd found, who knew what it cost to survive and what it meant to thrive. Their daughter was born in late spring on a morning when the restaurant was closed for cleaning. Ivy had worked until the day before, stubborn and determined even when Rhett begged her to rest. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she'd insisted. "You're 8 months pregnant and standing on your feet 12 hours a day. Then I have a whole month left to work." She'd made it 8.5 months before her water broke in the middle of prepping vegetables for the week. The labor was long and difficult. Ivy had survived too many hard things to expect childbirth to be easy. But when the midwife finally placed the baby in her arms, a tiny, perfect girl with dark hair and Rhett's eyes, every moment of pain became worth it. "She's beautiful," Rhett whispered, his voice thick with tears. "She's perfect." "She is," Ivy agreed, staring down at the small miracle in her arms. They named her Grace, not because of any religious meaning, but because Grace was what Ivy had been given when she'd deserved nothing. Not earned it, not bought it, just received it. And she wanted her daughter to grow up knowing that grace existed, that kindness was real, that the world could be cruel, but people didn't have to be. Watching Rhett hold their daughter for the first time, his large hands so gentle and sure, Ivy understood that they'd built something more than a restaurant or a marriage. They'd built a family, a real one, the kind neither of them had fully had before. And that was worth more than any opportunity, any security, any amount of money. Ivy took 3 months off after Grace was born, the longest break she'd taken in her adult life. Sally and Margaret ran the restaurant with surprising competence, proving that Ivy's training had paid off. "We've got this," Sally had insisted. "You take care of that baby." So Ivy did. She learned how to be a mother the way she'd learned everything else, by doing it, making mistakes, figuring it out as she went. She nursed Grace while reading cookbooks, sang to her while kneading bread dough one-handed, taught her the names of herbs before she was old enough to talk. Rhett was there for all of it, changing diapers in the middle of the night, walking Grace around the house when she wouldn't sleep, looking at Ivy with wonder like he still couldn't believe this was his life. "Thank you," he said one night when Grace was finally asleep and they were collapsed on the couch together. "For what?" "For this, for her, for giving me a family I didn't know I needed." Ivy leaned her head on his shoulder. You gave me one too. Years passed. The restaurant grew more successful. They hired more staff, expanded the menu slightly, became a genuine fixture in the community. People came from towns 50 miles away just to eat at Mercer House. Ivy trained dozens of young women, many of them girls like her. Too big, too poor, too damaged by a world that had never been kind. She gave them jobs, skills, confidence, a place where they were valued not despite who they were, but because of it. And she taught them what she'd learned the hard way, that being soft didn't mean being weak, that kindness in a cruel world was the most dangerous thing of all, that survival was an act of defiance, and thriving was revenge against everyone who'd ever tried to break them. You're changing lives, one of the investors told her during a visit. These women you train, they go on to do remarkable things. They were always capable of remarkable things, Ivy corrected. They just needed someone to believe in them. Grace grew up in the restaurant. She learned to walk between tables, said her first words in the kitchen, helped roll out pie dough as soon as she was tall enough to reach the counter. She was 5 years old when she asked Ivy why some of the women who worked at the restaurant looked sad sometimes. Because they've been hurt, Ivy answered honestly. The world hasn't been kind to them. Like it wasn't kind to you? Ivy paused, surprised. Who told you that? Papa. He said you're the strongest person he knows because you survived when people were mean to you. Ivy's throat tightened. That's true. Will you teach me to be strong like that? You're already strong, Grace. You just don't know it yet. Ivy pulled her daughter close. But I'll teach you everything I know. How to stand up for yourself, how to help others, how to build something good in a world that's trying to be cruel. Okay, Grace said seriously. Then, with the casual cruelty of a 5-year-old's honesty, Mama, why are you so much bigger than other mamas? Ivy had been dreading this question, had prepared answers in her head. But looking at her daughter's curious, innocent face, she found herself telling the truth instead. Because bodies come in all different sizes, and mine happens to be big. Some people think that's bad, but they're wrong. My body is strong. It carried you. It works hard every day. It's mine, and I've stopped apologizing for it. I think you're beautiful, Grace said simply. And in that moment, Ivy believed her. Rhett stayed by her side through all of it. He continued working at both the ranch and the restaurant, splitting his time and energy between two worlds, sometimes helping with renovations at Mercer House, sometimes at Black Hollow, dealing with ranch business after Clay's health started failing. They fought sometimes, had bad days, made mistakes. Money was tight occasionally, stress was high frequently, but they never stopped choosing each other, never stopped building the life they'd both been too afraid to dream of. On their 10th anniversary, they stood in the kitchen of Mercer House after closing. Grace was with Sally for the night, giving them rare time alone. The restaurant was quiet and clean, smelling faintly of the evening's meals. Rhett wrapped his arms around Ivy from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. You know what I was thinking about today? He asked. What? That night at the Velvet Mare, when I stood in the hallway and did nothing. Ivy tensed slightly. They'd talked about it over the years, but it still hurt sometimes. If I could go back, Rhett continued, I'd do everything differently. I'd step in. I'd defend you. I'd be the person you needed. I know. But here's the thing. Rhett turned her around to face him. If I'd done that, we might never have ended up here. You might have taken that job in Denver and built an amazing life without me. I might still be pretending to be someone I'm not. We might have missed each other entirely. That's a generous way of looking at your cowardice, Ivy said, but she was smiling. Maybe. Or maybe it's just the truth. We both had to become who we are before we could find each other. All the pain, all the mistakes, all the years of feeling like we didn't belong anywhere. It led us here. Ivy looked around the kitchen she'd built, at the life she'd created, at the man who'd helped her become someone she'd never imagined being. You're right, she said quietly. I wouldn't change any of it, not if it meant losing this. Neither would I. They stood there in the quiet kitchen, and Ivy thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived at Black Hollow Ranch, desperate, exhausted, convinced she'd never be anything more than invisible labor. That woman was still part of her, would always be part of her. The scars didn't disappear just because life got better, but she wasn't that woman anymore. She was Ivy Mercer Calloway, wife, mother, business owner, survivor. The woman who'd taken every cruel thing the world threw at her and used it to build something beautiful. The woman nobody wanted who'd become the woman everyone needed. And that, Ivy realized, was the real victory. Not proving the world wrong about her, but proving herself right. That she'd always been worth something, even when no one else could see it. That she'd always deserved love and safety and a place to call home. The world hadn't given her those things. She'd built them herself. With help, yes. With people who believed in her, yes. But ultimately, she'd been the one to decide she was worth fighting for. And she'd spent the rest of her life making sure other people knew they were worth fighting for too. That was the legacy she'd leave. Not a restaurant or a reputation, but the knowledge that strength came in forms the world didn't recognize. That survival was its own kind of heroism, that the people society dismissed were often the ones with the most to teach. Outside Mercer House, the Wyoming stars burned bright against the darkness. Inside, warmth and light and love filled every corner of the space Ivy had built. And standing in her kitchen with Rhett's arms around her and Grace asleep safely nearby, Ivy Mercer finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place, not a building, but a feeling. The feeling of being seen, being valued, being loved exactly as you are. And that was something worth more than anything else in the world.